Well, now we have the new phrase here, and that is the participial phrase. Read this particular thing here. It says, like adjectives which describe a noun or a pronoun, participle phrases describe a noun or a pronoun. Therefore, they, like adjectives, must be kept as close as possible to the thing they modify. Now, we have seen noun phrases, right? We have seen noun phrases. We have seen verb phrases, correct? Noun phrases, verb phrases. We saw infinitive phrases, right? Infinitive phrases. In the previous video, we saw gerund phrase, correct? We have seen all these phrases. Now, noun phrase never modifies anything because a noun never modifies anything. Have you ever seen a noun modifying something? Right? It never does, right? So a noun phrase never modifies anything. Correct? It never acts like a modifier, by the way. The noun phrase never acts like a modifier. Similarly, gerund phrase never act like modifiers. Word phrases never act like modifiers. Infinitive phrases, they at times may act like modifiers. And whatever acts like a modifier, its placements become very critical. So we know that participial phrases, they modify something. Infinitive phrases also may modify something, and therefore their placement is very important. Even prepositional phrases which we have discussed may modify something. So noun phrase, verb phrase, gerund phrase, they don't modify, but participle phrase, infinitive phrase, prepositional phrase, they do modify, and therefore their placement is very critical. Infinitive and prepositional phrases, they might be placed little away from the object they modify. So you can say, of all my friends, he's the best, or he's the best of all my friends. Prepositional phrases, you can place them with greater liberty and still the meaning of the sentence is clear. Even the infinitive phrases can be placed with greater liberty. But the participle phrases, you cannot have that liberty. You don't have that liberty. You have to place them very carefully, because if the placement is not in at the right place, in fact the placement is at the not the right word, it might give a different meaning to our sentence. And that's why we must study participle phrases very carefully. It says here, like adjectives which describe a noun or a pronoun, participle phrases describe a noun or a pronoun. Therefore, participle phrases like adjectives must be as close as possible to what? The thing they modify. Right? So look at this. The books lying on the table belong to me. Right? The books is the main idea, the subject of the sentence, and the verb is belong. Lying is not a verb. Please understand this. We have been trying to understand participle, gerund, and verbs so that we are clear with this. The books belong to me. And what are the books? Which kind of books? The books lying on the table. So this becomes basically a kind of adjective. Right? You would say, how does the participle phrase act like an adjective? Look at this. It's a very good question. The red book belongs to me. So you would say that the red basically is acting like an adjective. The word red is nothing but an adjective. The red book belongs to me. The book belongs to me, and the book also has the extra quality of being red. The book is not red. The book is lying on the table. So the phrase lying on the table is doing the job what red does in this particular sentence. And therefore, the way red is an adjective, this also is acting like an adjective. We call it as a participle, right? So this is basically a participle phrase, not a gerund. Why? Because a gerund always takes the position of a noun. The participle takes the position of an adjective. The book lying on the table belongs to me, right? Devastated by her GMAT score, the student committed suicide. So who was devastated by the GMAT score? The student, right? The student is the subject of the sentence, right? So the subject of the sentence is the student. This is the main clause. This is the main clause. The student committed suicide. This is the main clause, right? This entire thing is the main clause. The subject of the main clause is the student, and the verb is committed. The student committed suicide. And what is who is that student? The one devastated by her GMAT score. So you can say that the student is the subject of the sentence, committed is the verb, devastated is the head of the participle phrase, and what is that phrase? Devastated is the head of the participle phrase, and what is that phrase? devastated by her GMAT score, which modifies the noun, the student. Right? Janet has been to each and every World Heritage Site, right? And what is that site? Site located in India. So Janet has been to each. If I stop my sentence here, Janet has been to each and every World Heritage Site. It means basically each and every World Heritage Site across the world, right? But if I say site, what kind of site? Site located in India. So this becomes a kind of an adjective for site. What kind of site? The ones located in India, and therefore this becomes a participle phrase. Janet is the subject of the sentence. The corresponding verb is has been. Of course, Janet is the subject, has been is the verb. Located is the participle, that is the head of the participle phrase, located in India, which modifies the noun site. So here in these some examples we have taken the participle phrase. Let's go and take a few more examples. Here is something very important regarding the punctuating of the participle phrase. Now, please understand this. Read this. Since the participle phrases are nothing but descriptions, they might come in commas, depending on whether the description is necessary or unnecessary, and whether the description comes at the start, in between, or at the end of the sentence. Now, please look this carefully. It says here that since the participle phrases are nothing but descriptions, they might come in commas depending on whether the description is necessary or unnecessary, and whether the description comes at the start, in between, or at the end of a sentence, right? If a participle phrase begins a sentence, a comma should be placed at the end of the phrase. This is very important. This is very important. It says if a participle phrase begins a sentence, a comma should be placed at the end of the phrase. It says here, surprised by the manager's behavior, right? And who is surprised by the manager's behavior? It is basically the employee, right? So you have the modifier, right? The participle phrase is acting like a modifier. So whenever I use a modifier, modifier is not a it's a function done by a particular word or a phrase. It's not a grammatical unit as such. So surprised by the manager's behavior, comma, the employee decided to put in her papers, right? So this is the main idea of the sentence, right? The employee is the subject, decided is the verb. The employee decided to do something to put in her papers, right? And who is this employee? The one surprised by the manager's behavior. So this participle phrase is modifying the noun the employee, and every modifier, please understand this because I'm just digressing from the main topic here. Every modifier must have a modified. And therefore, when you start your sentence with a modifier, that is a participle phrase, you have to ensure that after the comma, this is the phrase, you put a comma, and then you have the thing that is getting modified. The way we had devastated by her GMAT score, someone committed suicide. So, who is that someone? The one who is devastated by the GMAT score. So, the modifier starts the sentence immediately after the comma. You must have the right thing, right? John, right? John, stupefied by the waiter's arrogance, walked out of the restaurant. Now, see what happens here. In the first case, we had the participle phrase starting the sentence, right? And then we had put a comma, and after that, we had the main clause, right? The main clause, the main idea. The employee decided to put in her papers. In the second example, we don't have the participle phrase starting the sentence. We have the subject of the sentence, John, right? John. And who is stupefied by the waiter's arrogance? It is John, right? So we have John, the subject of the sentence, the noun, and the modifier is stupefied by the waiter's arrogance, which is modifying John. Again, we are going by the principle of that you must keep the participle phrase close to the thing it modifies. The way we have surprised by the manager's behavior, and this modifier is modifying the employee. Similarly, we have stupefied by the waiter's arrogance, and this modifier is modifying John, right? So the basic sentence is John walked out of the restaurant. But between John and the verb walked, so this is the subject, which is a noun, and the verb is walked. Between that, we have a modifier modifying John. John walked out of the restaurant, and what is the description of John? He was stupefied by the waiter's arrogance, and therefore this would qualify as a modifier. Don't think that this is a verb because the verb is here. John walked out of the restaurant, right? John is the subject of the sentence. The verb is walked. The participle phrase, stupefied by the waiter's arrogance, has been put in commas because the phrase gives extra information or unnecessary information. Right? So we have put the phrase in. It's not always necessary that you put the commas, but here, because the writer thinks that this is something extra, he can put a comma. We will take one example when there is no comma. If the participle phrase comes in between a sentence, the phrase should be put in commas if it gives unnecessary or extra information. So here we have extra information, that's why we have put commas. If the information is vital, then the comma should be left out. Now look at this example here. The man apprehended by the police is my uncle. So the man is just not enough for me to know the person. I can know John by his name, and therefore this is sufficient information, and therefore this has been put in commas. But the man, I just don't know. It is not enough. This information is not enough for me to identify the man, and therefore this description becomes critical. Which kind of man? The man apprehended by the police. And therefore this is important, and therefore there is no comma because it's a necessary information. The man apprehended by the police is my uncle. Apprehended by the police is necessary information, as the man cannot be sufficiently identified without the participle phrase. And that's the reason why we haven't put commas here. Look at the next example now. Mumbai, comma, located on the eastern coast of India, is one of the biggest commercial hubs of the world. Mumbai is basically the subject of the sentence. The verb is here, is, and this is basically a modifier. And we have put this in commas because Mumbai is one of the biggest commercial hubs. This is nothing but an extra information about Mumbai, which we can ignore, and therefore we can put in commas. Mumbai, located on the eastern coast of India, is on. You can also shift this modifier at the start. You can say located on the eastern coast of India or on the western coast. Don't go by the factual information. Located on the eastern coast of India. Okay, I will put it here western. It is not the eastern, by the way. So Mumbai, located on the western coast of India, is one of the biggest commercial hubs of the world. Located on the eastern or western coast of India is the participle phrase that adds extra information because the proper noun Mumbai is enough for us to identify the sub-object. So whenever you have a description, that description is necessary or unnecessary depends upon the thing that is being described is itself enough for us to identify or not. We couldn't identify the man, and therefore this becomes necessary. We can identify Mumbai, we can identify John, and therefore the description has come in commas. Let's go and take something more about participle phrases. It says here, if a participle phrase comes at the end of a sentence. So we had seen the participle phrase PP coming at the start of a sentence. We have put a comma and then we have the main clause, right? We had seen the previous example, the first example in fact. We had the participle phrase, then we put a comma because the sentence begins with the participle phrase, and then you have the main clause. Then we had the participle phrase coming in between. So when it comes in between, it depends whether this is necessary or unnecessary. Then you put a comma or you remove the comma, right? And now the third case is when it comes at the end of the sentence. So if a participle phrase comes at the end of a sentence, a comma usually precedes the phrase if it modifies the entire sentence. Please understand this. The entire sentence, and then you have a participle phrase. Now this participle phrase might modify the entire sentence, or it might modify a thing that comes somewhere before this. Now look at this. Germany scored 7 goals in the semi-final against Brazil, stunning football fans across the globe. Since the participle phrase stunning football fans across the globe modifies Germany and not Brazil, the comma precedes the participle. So this comma has been put here because we know that it is Germany that is stunning the football fans across the globe. It is not Brazil, and therefore I have put a comma. Had it been Brazil, I would have removed the comma, and in that case, the ing participle would have touched the noun Brazil. So, if the main clause ends here and you have an ing participle phrase, the ing participle phrase, if it is not modifying this thing immediately before it, then you have to put a comma here. It says here, right? Germany scored 7 goals in the semi-final against Brazil. Stunning, right? So this stunning football fans is not modifying Brazil, it is modifying Germany, and therefore we have put a comma here. I have often seen Lucy staring at me. Now you have two classic examples. In one case, staring is basically modifying Lucy, and in the previous case, stunning is modifying Germany. And because staring is modifying Lucy, I have not put a comma here. But because stunning is modifying Germany and not Brazil, I have put a comma. So this comma can be very critical in giving the right meaning to the sentence, right? So Germany scored 7 goals in the semifinal against Brazil, comma, stunning football fans across the globe. I have often seen Lucy staring at me. So here it modifies Lucy straight away, and therefore we have removed the comma. It says here, since the participle phrase staring at me modifies Lucy and not the pronoun I, no comma has been placed before the phrase. She stays alone in her suburban mansion, right? She stays alone in her suburban mansion, separated from her husband and her in-laws. Since the participle phrase separated from her husband and her in-laws modifies the pronoun she, the comma precedes. So because we have put a comma, why? Because this separated is modifying she, an element that comes much before the phrase, and therefore we have put a comma. The president walked out of the room smiling at all of us. Again, it is modifying whom? The president, and therefore we have put a comma. It says here, in 1964, the Soviet Union issued warnings to USA, creating fears of another world war. Since the participle phrase creating fears of another world war modifies the entire sentence by showing a consequence of an event mentioned in the main clause, the comma precedes the phrase. So this basically is modifying the entire. The Soviet Union issued warnings to USA, and as a result of that, something happened. That something happened has been put here in the ing form, and therefore we have put a commas. So you put a comma if the modifier is modifying an element that comes quite at the start of the sentence, or this entire modifier is modifying the entire sentence. In both the cases you put a comma. But if the modifier is modifying something that comes immediately before it, you don't put a comma. So in 1964, the Soviet Union issued warnings to USA, comma, creating fears of another world war. So we have seen the participial phrases. It might come at the start, you put a comma. It might come in between the sentence, you can put a comma depending on whether this information is critical or not critical. And it might come at the start, it might come at the end. You put a comma depending on whether the modifier is modifying something that comes at the start, or the modifier is modifying the entire sentence, or if the modifier modifies the thing that comes immediately before it, then there is no need to put the comma. So we have seen all the three different placements of the participle phrase in the sentence.